Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today we're going over the official B20 patch notes. Nearly a week after the playtest, we are getting the full update, and there is a lot more in it than what we originally thought. From infantry gameplay changes, map and layer changes, and a complete overhaul of the Canadian Armed Forces faction, this is a pretty substantial patch to the game. But before we dive in, I do want to remind everyone that I stream a lot of squad on Twitch, at twitch.tv/MoiDawg. I squad lead, run vehicles, and play pretty much every kit in the game. So if you have a question or just want to hang out and watch some squad live, come check it out. To kick it off, and what could possibly be the biggest change to infantry gameplay since the removal of Dead last year, the bandage resupply mechanic has been adjusted. Previously, whenever you would spawn, you would always receive 2 bandages, whether or not you used them. Unlike other ammo, bandages were the only things that were not persistent, meaning that a player could frequently respawn, bandage himself to keep from bleeding out, and pick up a down player without having a resupply. Starting in B20, if you used at least 1 bandage before you died, you will only have 1 bandage upon respawn. In order to receive the second bandage, you will have to rearm off of an ammo crate, ammo bag, or vehicle, and the only exception to this is the medic class, which will receive at minimum 3 bandages. The devs have stated that this change is to help incentivize teams that coordinate and use their logistics chains effectively, and to disincentivize teams from repeatedly attacking exclusively from rally points without coordinating with other support elements of the team such as helicopters, armored vehicles, and forward outposts. Now this is a huge infantry nerf, since in the past, one rally could successfully attack an enemy position over and over again without much of a problem. As long as there was a medic and each player was able to use their bandages, you could keep leapfrog pushing and reviving until you were able to overrun the hab. Now rallies and even habs that don't have ammo to rearm will be a lot easier to take out, since most players will probably use that 1 bandage for themselves instead of someone who is down. I can see this changing the meta a bit by almost requiring 2 medics and 1 rifleman in an infantry squad to make sure that there's plenty of bandages. Another big change that might go under the radar a bit is a new US camo, which has been adjusted to make it less bright than before. If you haven't really paid attention to the camo, you might not notice much of a difference, but when comparing the old and new models, it's pretty obvious the newer color is a huge improvement, especially on maps like Kamdesh. Moving on to vehicles, the Russians have a new type of desert camo, the 3 color stripes. I think this looks awesome, and my favorites at the moment are the BTRs and scout cars. Now it would be nice to carry on these camo patterns to other maps, like woodland or white stripes in the snow, but this is a great start, as it really differentiates the vehicles from those that are in the irregular militia. For the British, we had been shown the Crow's Bulldog during playtesting, but it appears that it was a bit too overpowered in testing to make it to the live game. Although we will be getting a closed turret, the new Bulldog has a GPMG, essentially the British machine gun, instead of a 50 cal. It was fun running around with 50 cal Bulldogs, but the damage output was a bit too much. With so much armor and firepower, the 50 cal could take out pretty much anything from scout cars to BTRs, so I think this is a good change to help balance the vehicle gameplay. Additionally, vehicle engines as a whole have had their sound reduced, making it a bit easier to hear when you're next to them. Now I haven't had any problems hearing enemy vehicles yet, so I'll have to keep monitoring this change, but I do think it might stealth buff a couple vehicles that have super distinctive sounds like the scout car and make them a bit more sneaky than before. Another sound nerf is the removal of the turret rotational sound, which you'll notice if you're like me and find yourself inside an armored vehicle quite a lot. Instead of the constant whirring we used to have, moving the turrets are now completely silent, and although the devs have stated that this is a temporary fix so that they can later implement a quote-unquote more nuanced sound, I'm really enjoying the peace and quiet while I'm able to talk with my squad and command chat. Before we get into map changes, I did mention earlier that the Canadians have had a complete overhaul. I'd go even as far as saying that B20 is the calf patch with how much has been added in the game for them. To start, the Canadian player models have been changed quite drastically, as all players now have a brown vest if they're in the woodland camo to help differentiate them from the Russian models. And there are also a lot more variations for marksmen, medics, and auto rifleman classes. Essentially, this means you should see a lot more boonie hats as the Canadians. The rifles have also been adjusted, with both the C7 and C8 rifles having a bit more recoil than before. This also affects the EOTech sight, which was reported to have almost no recoil at all, resulting in a practically full auto laser. With these recoil changes, it seems like these rifles are now comparable to other factions' rifles and are a lot more balanced. Additionally, the C79A2 optics now have adjustable ranging, with zeros starting at 200 meters and allowing you to range up all the way to 800 meters. I'm still not a huge fan of this rifle in general, but I do like the ability to individually range this now, as the starting 0 is quite hard to use at longer range targets. Kit-wise, the Auto Rifleman now has a second kit with an iron sight machine gun that you can select, and the CAF Optic Rifleman has been balanced to only have 1 grenade instead of 2, keeping in line with the other factions. Now, the vehicle changes are the most exciting part of CAF in this update, in my opinion. And although we've all been excited to see the new Bulldog, the new CAF truck is absolutely amazing. These MSVS trucks are beasts, and the model is probably the coolest thing I've seen in the game. It looks completely unique to the Canadians and is so incredibly detailed that even the interior cab is a like-for-like representation of the real thing. Seeing these fly down roads and do logi runs makes it feel like the Canadians are their own faction instead of a carbon copy of the Americans. They've also introduced new mortar models as well as new starting music to help drive that point home even further. Now for the LAV, B20 has balanced the damage model to make it so these LAVs no longer get insta-killed by ATGMs. Personally, the LAV is my favorite vehicle to hate, since one of my biggest complaints about it in the past was that it would frequently be up against Russian armor, which on any given map could result in nearly 10 vehicle-fired Conkers missiles from BMPs or Spandrels, and that's not even including the cornets that could be set up by infantry. Any Russian vehicle that spotted the LAV first would win 9 times out of 10 due to this one-tap mechanic, but now LAVs will have a fighting chance. The LAV itself has been adjusted so that if it is hit by an ATGM, it will begin burning instead of instantly exploding, which could allow for either retreat behind cover for repairs or even let the gunner kill the threat if it is able to keep firing. However, the LAV has also had its side armor reduced, as well as its increased vulnerability to heat rounds. LAVs will now start burning at 2 heat tank rounds instead of 3, and if they're not paying attention, can get absolutely shredded by 30 mic BTRs if their side is exposed. This is a real interesting patch for the LAV, since it ultimately buffs them against ATGMs, but nerfs them against any other type of heat or sabo round. At the moment, it looks like they're in a pretty decent spot, with good LAVs killing out of position BMPs and BTRs, and good BTRs and BMPs killing out of position LAVs. From what I've seen on layers with the Russians, the vehicle balance is usually 2 LAVs for 3 30 mic BTRs, which seems pretty good for now. I'm just happy that the LAV finally has a fighting chance against some of these Russian vehicles. I know it's never going to be perfectly balanced, but being insta-killed by even something like the BMP-1 is just ridiculous for a modern vehicle. The Leopard has also been buffed. The rangefinder is now simplified and states the full distance when ranging. Previously, if a range was, let's say, 200 meters, the rangefinder would say 20. Although it doesn't really affect much, it's still nice to see since it makes acquiring targets and finding the range that much easier, since you do have to manually scroll. Additionally, the health has been adjusted as well. The ammo rack and turret components have had a 50% increase in health. This is a huge buff to the Leopard, as knocking out this turret removes the ability for the gunner to range targets with the scroll wheel, a problem I've had with this vehicle since it's been introduced in the game. When fighting T-72s, or any tank for that matter, most fights would result in a knocked out turret, and you would either need to RTB for repairs immediately, or you'd most likely get killed while you missed your shots. I still think that the Leopard is on the lower tiers of tanks and squad, but these buffs might actually allow them to hold their own a bit better against T-72s. Helicopters have also had nearly all of their problems from B19 ironed out. Now, I don't want to say it's 100% gone, but I have seen almost no desync since B20, so knock on wood that these issues are actually fixed. The times I have seen a little desync is during really high ping players playing the helicopters, so you may get a bit of rubber banding if you're at over 200 ping, but that really shouldn't be a common thing in normal games. Also, on some maps like Talil Outskirts, helicopters have had their flight ceilings reduced to a max of 400 to 600 meters. Over the patches, helicopters have moved from being flying tanks to budget UAVs, with pilots frequently going as high as the skybox would allow, swapping to their camera and hovering above enemy armor or emplacements without worrying they could get shot down, and frequently spamming the observation mark. Although this can still happen, the newer flight ceilings will make this much less effective, especially if armor or toes are paying attention. The biggest addition to B20 is Lashkar Valley, which I touched on quite a bit on my playtest video. If you do want to take a closer look at the map, I'd recommend watching that video, but I would also like to mention it introduces a couple really interesting territory control layers. The first one follows the major roads on the map, while the second forces teams to contest a river valley. I really like playing both of these, and I will say that I think it's a much better interpretation of what territory control should be. The narrow hexes forced a lot of action around 1 or 2 points of interest, with fights happening relying not only on the contested hexes, but many vehicles and players trying to position themselves nearby or on the flanks in order to catch the other one off guard. Both layers had action-packed games, and by the end of it, we had either won or lost by just a few hexes. But to be honest, it felt much more rewarding than some of the other more sprawling territory control games. Even if you're not a TC fan, I'd highly recommend giving these layers a shot, because I had a lot of fun with them, and I think the rest of our team and enemy team did too, once we got over the initial shock of how the map looked. For older maps, many of them now have helicopter layers, which in my opinion makes them feel like almost completely new maps themselves, because they play really different. Al-Basra has also received an aircraft type layer as well, with AES V2 giving the Americans 3 helicopters and a handful of light vehicles. I played this as both the Insurgents and the Americans during both playtesting and official release, and although I dislike AES in general, I really enjoyed playing this, since it has a unique take on the vehicle layers themselves. Gorodoc has also had a completely new layer implemented, with a throwback to the old parallel, advanced, and secure game mode. In Gorodoc ASV2, teams have the usual objective points up until the middle caps. Here, they split off, requiring teams to capture both of them in order to move forward. I absolutely love this game, and while it took our team a bit to figure out what we needed in terms of defense to protect both flags, as in the beginning we would constantly run back and forth as the enemy flipped it, we eventually timed it so our caps lined up, our defense held, and our offense was able to neutralize the other flag. It definitely required a lot of teamwork, and squads have to accept that they may have to sit on a boring defense for a couple of minutes, but I think we really need more of these layers in the game for sure. Many of the other maps have had complete optimization passes as well, while Korra specifically has had a lot more of the map redone with new foliage, grass, and other tweaked terrain features to make it look a little bit more updated and in line with newer maps. Manic 5 has also had what looks like a complete overhaul, with new points of interest, new gameplay layers, and a bunch of new vehicle balance tweaks as well. If you haven't played Manic in a while, I'd really recommend checking it out. And I'll be making a full video on this revised map looking a little bit closer at the gameplay layers as well, since I think it deserves a little bit closer look than just a small blurb at the end of this video. Now, the patch notes for B20 are really long, and there are plenty of other important things like changing water collisions or fixing road splines, but that just about covers all the big changes that you'd be able to notice on a day-to-day basis in Squad. I'll drop a link to the full patch notes in the description below, but what do you guys think of B20? Is Lashkar Valley living up to the hype? What about the new Canadians? Are you liking their new vehicles and other balance changes? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the patch, and if you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more Squad content, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace. New Korra, let's go! Woo! New Korra, oh my god, I've been waiting for this moment! New Korra! Woo! Woo! Yeah, B20! New Korra! Woo! Woo! Yeah, let's go!